about is something that I've been looking at for a couple of years, about how money is created. Most people don't actually have any conception of how money is created. And what's interesting about what's happened just recently is that the Occupy movement has suddenly sprung up out of everywhere, all over the world. And unusually, they're all worried about what the banks are doing, or about the crisis and all that. But even if you look at some of the output that they've given, none of them seem to have any sort of conception of exactly how money is created. I can't see a thing. So if I give you an example, a very simple example of how money is created. If you have a mortgage, so you go into a bank, what you've got to remember is that banks actually do not have any money in the vault. We're all told that the banks have money in the vault. This is not the case. What actually happens is money is created out of thin air by having a contract. Okay? So what happens is you go into a bank, you sign a contract. Let's suppose you want to buy a house for £100,000. That contract actually says that you will pay back over, let's say, 25 years, £100,000. In return for you signing that contract, which is work you will do in the economy, the bank will create a deposit account. It will type numbers into a computer, and it will allow you to take those numbers out of the computer, put it in someone else's computer, the person you're buying the house off of, and then you can get the house. You then have possession of the house. Now, the interesting thing about this is two things. First of all, that the contract that you sign also has this additional thing. It's called interest. Okay? But the amount of money that is created is only the original principal, which is the £100,000. So what you have to do is you have this contract where you have to go into the economy, earn £110,000, but there's only £100,000 created. So of course the question is, where's the extra £10,000 come from? With all the money is created in this way, which pretty much it is, the only way you can get that extra £10,000 is if someone else, a second person, does exactly the same thing. They go into the bank, they sign a contract, the bank creates another £100,000. Let's imagine that this is forget about all the other money that's in the economy, let's just imagine we've got one contract, my very first contract in the economy. So the total money supply is £100,000. I have a contract to repay £110,000, 100,000 plus 10% interest. The second person has a second contract, so £200,000 now in the economy. But there's two contracts out, one for 110, second one for 110, 220. So the interest gap has risen by 20 grand. So there's pressure on a third person to go in there to get another contract. So there's £300,000 in the economy, but their contract's got another 10%. So we're £30,000 short. We've got an economy with 300 grand in it, 3 contracts out for 330 grand. This is a Ponzi scheme. It is impossible to pay back the debt with this scheme. This is something that has been well known. It's only really in the last 30 or 40 years where the electronic money has come into being that this has become more prevalent. People have actually understood what's going on. Some of you might have read this one here. This is Josiah Stapp, President of the Bank of England. Just read it out. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in equity, born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, leave them the power to create money. With a flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. Take this great power away from them, and all great fortunes like mine will disappear. But this would then be a better and happier world to live in. But if you want to continue, this is the key phrase, be slaves of banks, and pay your cost of your own slave, and let the banks continue to create money and control credit. This is the key thing. Just last month in September, this outfit, the New Economics Foundation, printed a book, How Money is Created. This has looked very, very closely at the modern banking system, right up to date. This is precisely the same as it was back in 1927. This is an interesting fact. This actually shows really what I'm saying about this Ponzi scheme. What you must remember about this, the way that I've described this, all money is created that way. 3% of it, and this is where the solution comes in, because I'm very solution orientated, is actually created by what is called note and coin, the ordinary, guess what, notes and coins. And the way that that's created is the government goes to a printers, they're called Belarus, and for 6 pence, they create a £20 note. That £20 note is given to the Bank of England, and they credit the treasury account with electronic money, £20, the face value of a £20 note. So you have a lorry load of £20, £50 note, £5 note, £10 note, come from Belarus, go to the Bank of England, the treasury account is credited with this electronic money, and that is then shipped, the actual physical coin and note is shipped off to the various individual banks. So the solution to this problem of constantly having to have new contracts to create new money is to have all the money created in this way. And there is legislation. This is a really interesting quote here. This is actually from an outfit called, they're called the Michael Journal. They are Christians, a sect, a white hat Christian. This was written in the 80s for what it happens. And what this is about is saying that if one admits that creation of money is possible for lower authority like the banks, why would it not be possible for a sovereign authority of the country, the government? What prevents, who forbids the government to do so? One accepts that banks can create money but refuses this power to the government. The government refuses itself a privilege it has granted to the banks. This is the height of imbecility, and it is. Because this contract process I was talking about, where the gap between the amount of money in circulation and the interest that is required to be paid back on the contract is constantly going out of kilter. And that is the reason we are having the credit crisis. Mervyn King, the Bank of England, said last year, the governor of the Bank of England said, of all the banking systems we have, this is the worst possible one. Some people realise this. Most people do not. This is why I produced this handout. This is why now I've been going down to Occupy Brighton, trying to educate the people there, to get it onto their statement. I have some colleagues who are up in London who are doing the same thing with Occupy London. What we're trying to do is to get this message out into the crowd, because once we can get this message out, people like your good selves can take this on board, can understand it, and start to pressurise your MPs. So that then, at the moment, we have 3 MPs in the Parliament who understand what's going on. Those 3 MPs are having a big struggle trying to persuade other people. Cameron last week, or a couple of weeks ago, David Cameron, I don't know if you remember, he said, the best thing you can do is pay your credit card back to help the economy. As if the banks work like a piggy bank. Hello? They do not work like a piggy bank. In fact, that's the worst thing you can do if you want to prevent a crash, because going back to the example of the contracts that go in. If you have a contract for 100 grand and you created £100,000 of electronic and it comes out, when you pay that money back, the contract has to expire, and so does the money. So when you pay the loan, so-called, back, the money shrinks out of the money supply. If all the money in the economy, the UK public debt is greater than all the money that exists in the economy, if all the money in our bank accounts is used to pay it off, we would still owe the banks £306 billion because of this interest gap, because of these repeat contracts. Getting a little bit controversial, am I okay for time? 1 minute. A little bit controversial. As you may well know, NATO bombed a country in North Africa, and Gaddafi was murdered because of that. He wanted to sell his oil in gold dinars, which is a gold-backed currency, not in dollars. Some people think that this was one of the reasons that the NATO forces decided that it was not a good idea, because he wanted to get out of this Ponzi scheme. All the other schemes that you hear on the news, like, for example, credit default swaps, you might have heard of something called fractional reserve banking. What fractional reserve banking is, they take that original Ponzi scheme I've talked about, and they use 90% of the value of that contract that you've signed, and then they multiply it up. And you can actually multiply it up 400 or 500% to increase this fluffy money that's all based on these contracts. It will collapse, it has collapsed. The Babylonians had the same system. They had every 7 years, they wiped out the debt. When we had the big inflation, the big crash in 1929, a type of currency called script currency. What's going on here is that this business of interest, what it does is it sucks. It's a Ponzi scheme, all Ponzi schemes do. The constant renewal from the underneath pushes the money up to the pyramid, and this shows it. This is the amount of interest paid versus the interest gained from savings. As you can see, it's only the top 10%